Hey everybody, it's Dr. May. How are you today? I'm here for Sensorimotor Psychotherapy, and that's our series. And today's topic is called the 3 phases of therapy. So it's been commonly done over the years, since actually like the late 1800s, that there's the idea that if you're working through trauma, it makes sense to have around 3 different phases of therapy and to kind of progress in a certain kind of an order in order to be most helpful and less triggering. So I'm going to talk about that today, and also how that applies to the way the sensorimotor psychotherapy skills are laid out. And that's going to be for more skills to come in the future, and just so you can kind of have a better idea of how you want to proceed. All right, so let's get to the PowerPoint. Here we go. All right, so as you can see, this is 3 phases of therapy, 1, 2, and 3. Computer's a bit slow today for a change. So anyways, you can see the first one is a toolbox, right? So that's about building resources. And the second one is about addressing memories. And the third one is about moving forward in your life. Okay, so all 3 are addressed in sensorimotor psychotherapy, as well as some other trauma-related therapies. So this is not a brand new concept, it's an older concept, but it's one that makes sense and that we're going to apply here. Okay, so here's a frequently asked question that I've heard, I'm sure other people have heard, for people coming in for trauma treatment. So people often say, well, okay, I just started my therapy. I came here because I want help with this trauma that I have, this problem I've had in my life. I've been abused, I've been traumatized, I've been raped, I've been assaulted, and it's been taking over my life. And so I want to talk about it right away because that's why I came. And so sometimes your therapist might say to you, you know what, we need to wait on that. First, we have to take care of some other things. And you might say, but that's why I'm here. I want to talk about it. Okay, so why is this not always the best idea? Well, first of all, if you just started your therapy and you barely know your therapist, how do you know if you could feel comfortable enough to do it with this person? If you could trust that person enough to reveal such personal information? Because trauma gets discussed inside of a trusting relationship. That's when it works the best. So if you're basically spilling your guts to a stranger, it could actually be re-traumatizing to you. Another thing is that if you came in not only with your trauma issues, but with other compounding issues, such as feeling suicidal, self-injuring, addiction, eating disorders, substance abuse, and on top of that, you have your trauma. Sometimes, opening up more trauma would make your other behaviors even worse. So it's important to address skills and other competencies before you get into the really painful stuff. Okay, so it kind of reminds me of this. So if you look at the picture of the bird here, the picture says, in life, we must first learn to crawl, then stand, then walk, then run, and only then fly. We cannot crawl into flying. Okay, so sometimes in certain contexts, it makes total sense. Oh yeah, of course I wouldn't run before I can't walk, right? So we have to go step by step and have the right kind of foundations and competencies and personal resources and skills in place before we open up the really painful stuff that can totally unravel you. So that's why the therapy starts with, number 1, developing resources, and then addressing memories. And then after that's settled, then we find ways to move forward in our life and build what they call in DBT, a life worth living. Okay, so sometimes the phases can go back and forth or out of order, but I'm going to present them to you this way because ultimately they build on each other. Okay, so here it goes. So phase 1, developing resources. So I want to talk to you about how this is played out in sensorimotor psychotherapy. Of course, there's many different ways to develop resources. For example, in dialectical behavior therapy, you're encouraged to first learn your DBT coping skills before you go into a later phase of therapy, which has to do with trauma. Here, there's other things that we teach you, okay? So here's some of the stuff that we're gonna be going over in the next section, okay? So the developing resources is gonna be about identifying the survival resources that currently help us cope with adverse experiences. So a lot of times we come to therapy thinking everything's bad, right? I have this problem and that problem, this is wrong and that's wrong. But if we look a little more closely, believe it or not, we actually have more resources than we probably give ourselves credit for. So identifying what they are what we already have is really important. And then learning to kind of capitalize on them even more and even build new ones. So that's really important first foundation. Other times it helps us to recognize triggers and signs of excessive arousal. So when I get really overwhelmed, anxious, angry, or even shut down, which is a sign that I'm overwhelmed, what are the things that lead me to that? Okay, we discussed this in the previous video about window of tolerance, but being aware of what triggers us is important because that could lead us back to the old stuff eventually, right? But knowing what the triggers are in the here and now helps us to cope better with the here and now. And then when we recognize what those triggers are, we could start to use our resources to regulate the arousal that gets kicked up by those triggers, right? So let's say I still tend to be triggered by certain types of people, places, and things. But now I have more resources at my disposal and coping skills to manage the emotional upset that follows. Okay, so it expands my window of tolerance. It helps me cope with my life better. All right, so if I could get through my day-to-day life better and be able to tolerate a wider range of experience, that's going to be a great first step, right? Because if I can't deal with my everyday life, how am I going to add on top of it dealing with my trauma too? Okay, and really opening that up. Another thing is because sensorimotor psychotherapy deals a lot with the body, we're going to develop your somatic resources, your body resources, right? So we're going to really get better at knowing how I can move differently, how I could use my posture, how I could use my gestures to affect my arousal, right? How can I use my body as a resource to help me get through my life better, okay? So I'm going to learn what somatic resources I already have, because chances are you're already doing things that are helping you and you don't even know what they are. So recognizing them helps you to use them more. And then we're going to teach you some new stuff to use that could help you regulate yourself by using your body as a tool, okay? And then we're going to change some traumatic, distressing, or unsatisfying orienting habits, right? So we talked about that in an earlier lesson called paying attention to the orienting response, right? Because sometimes because of our past experience, our attention is easily drawn to triggering things and we miss the rest of the picture. So by learning to look at other stuff and see things that maybe we overlooked, it gives us a broader, clearer picture of reality and helps us to make better decisions and helps us sometimes to even regulate our arousal. Okay, so all these are really important resources that we're going to continue to develop with the sensorimotor psychotherapy curriculum. Okay, all right. So as I've hinted before, it's good to start with this phase one, especially if you're finding yourself easily triggered, right? So if it's hard to get through a day without having other triggers about your past, if you're feeling like overwhelmed a lot, if you have strong levels of emotion, if it doesn't take much to stress you out, okay? And of course, certainly start with phase one if you have target behaviors, what they'll call them DBT target behaviors, which is my kind of my native language, so to speak. But basically, if you're doing things that are risky to you, right? So if you're hurting yourself with self-injury, if you're feeling suicidal a lot, if you have eating disorder stuff, substance abuse, or other addictive behaviors, it's important to address those first and cope with the triggering situations for those and calm those down so that if the trauma gets kicked up, those don't escalate further and put you at greater risk. Okay, also, it's good to start with resources for positive reasons, right? And anyone could benefit from starting with this phase, okay? You don't have to just say, oh, well, I'm basically regulated and so I don't need it, I'll just skip over it. Well, believe it or not, I really believe that anybody can gain from going over phase one. There's a lot of good stuff in there and it makes some of our unconscious things conscious and helps us to capitalize on what we already know and expand it. And who can use some extra coping skills, right? Or extra coping abilities and resources, right? So we may want to start with phase one if we want to be a little more confident, right? If we want to develop our self-esteem, our self-efficacy, and feel like I can handle things better, right? I feel like I'm a little stronger and I can capitalize on my strengths when I need to, right? Because that's part of what phase one helps us with, right? So this is really developing self-esteem in a positive way, right? By true abilities, not just by superficial things, such as the way I look or how skinny I am, for example, right? So It helps us to use our body as a resource, again, to help us, feel that competency, have a felt sense in our body that I'm more capable of handling my life. Okay, so now phase 2. Okay, so this is the addressing memories part. This is usually where a lot of people want to start in therapy because that's what they believe is the problem, right? It's my past that's haunting me now. I know I need to process this. I need to talk about it. I want to spill it, right? But believe it or not, that's not always how it has to go when you address memories. There's other ways too. But certainly, like it says in yellow here, just to reiterate, so memory shouldn't be the focus of your therapy until sufficient resources are developed and you're safe, physically safe, emotionally safe. And I'll add that you have a decent working relationship with your therapist if you're working with one. Okay, I know a lot of you are trying to do this on your own, trying to help yourself, and that's great. So, so for you, just make sure that you're coping adequately. And if you start the addressing memories skills and it's too much for you, you could just go back and work on your resources some more. Okay, so addressing memories doesn't just have to be spilling every detail and reliving the experience by going through the whole thing play by play. There's actually other ways to do it that are more effective and less painful. Okay, so it doesn't have to be what you think it is. And some people are terrified by this phase. They know they have to do it, but they're scared to death because their past experience said it has to be about spilling everything and overwhelming yourself. But that's actually not true. So let's talk about this. This is some of the tools that sensorimotor psychotherapy offers us for addressing memories. Okay, so just to give you a flavor of it, to maybe ease your mind a little if you have some anxiety about this phase. So it helps us to recognize signs of implicit memories, right? So if you watched the video about the memories that I have, there's different types of memories. There are explicit memories and autobiographical memories, which are about facts and facts about ourselves. There's emotional memories, which are more subtle and implicit, and that has to do with remembering the way I feel and re-feeling it again. Or sometimes if I'm in a certain feeling state, it easily brings me back to another time when I felt the same thing. But the implicit memories or the procedural memories has to do with the way my body remembers certain things about the trauma, right? So if I'm triggered now, it may not remember it in words, but it might remember that I recoil when I'm touched because touch meant something dangerous. Or it meant that I'm seeking out a sexual relationship with somebody because that was one of the few ways that I got attention. So I'm repeating things from the past without even realizing it's a procedural or unconscious type of a memory. So I have to recognize what are those for me and how are they playing out. Okay, so then I have to use physical resources, embody resources to cope with these memories. Because if they have to do with my physical body and the way it's moving and the way I'm reacting, I have to change that, right? So give myself new ways of reacting by changing what I'm physically doing. Okay, excuse me, people are talking outside. I'm just going to close the window. Sorry about that, guys. It's summertime and there's people walking around, so, Okay, so I hope that's a little quieter for us. All right, so another thing that's interesting about addressing memories is sometimes we have like a fixed way of telling ourselves the story. This happened and this happened and this happened, and every time I'm asked about it or I think about it, I pull it out in the same way. Other times we could say, you know what, let me retell the story in a slightly different and more empowering way. So one of the things might be to recognize what resources did I use in the past. So maybe I at the time, I didn't recognize, but you know what? Hiding out under my bed was a resource because that did keep me safe. Or, like yelling back or whatever, maybe that was a resource and I never thought about it. Or I ran to the nearest adult and that was a resource, but I never really thought that that was something that was good. I only focused on the bad thing that happened to me. So recognizing what we did that was to our survival benefit can actually help us feel differently about the memory. So we're going to go over that. Another thing they talk about is what they call maintaining dual awareness. So if I'm like re-experiencing a fight, flight, freeze response based on a memory, or I'm re-experiencing a flashback, or I'm re-experiencing a thought about the memory, I could step back and mindfully have one foot in the past and one foot in the present, right? I could ground myself in the here and now and also realize that I'm experiencing this memory from the past. And having that dual awareness can help me to deal with the memory better. Another thing, which we started to do in some earlier videos too, is a little preview of what's to come, is we can explore how our memories affect our 5 building blocks, right? So the 5 building blocks, like I said, go throughout the treatment, and it goes in the memory section as well. So in some past lessons, we talked about how to think about a positive experience, really put yourself there, and then think about how that affects your building blocks. Or think about a time when you really struggled or you're really under a lot of stress, and how did that affect your 5 building blocks? Okay, so we're going to do that some more in phase 2. Okay, and then another thing which is really cool is that we're going to practice empowering actions and physical impulses. So let's say at the time you were being assaulted by somebody or physically abused, and you were too young and too scared, and you weren't able to fight back. It would have been a dumb idea to fight back because you never would have won. And so you froze. But part of you secretly has this impulse to fight back, that your body still harbors this need to like stand up for yourself and push back that person. So there's ways to explore the feeling of that pushing away now. And going through it and really being mindful of what that feels like can help you heal that memory, okay? Or let's say you froze, but you really wanted to run away and you couldn't. So now you might explore walking or moving while you're experiencing that memory, and that helps you to feel like you're mobilized, and it changes your experience of the memory. Makes you feel like I actually was able to run, even though in the past you actually weren't able to run. All right, so things like that are physical resources that we're going to address that could help us reshape the memory. Okay, and then finally it says address dysregulating arousal and emotions relating to animal defenses. So fight, flight, freeze, and fold. So if you are chronically triggered into those survival mechanisms by triggers now that remind you of the past, sometimes part of the treatment is learning how to regulate your arousal now. So for example, if you were doing DBT, you'd be working on your distress tolerance and emotion regulation skills. And that's often emphasized as a way to deal with some of the after effects of trauma. Okay, so there's additional skills for that in sensorimotor psychotherapy, but there's really a lot of skills out there. And it's important to widen your window of tolerance by learning these coping skills for your dysregulated emotions and arousal now. Okay, so this may not have been what you thought addressing memories was all about, but it actually kind of goes with it. Okay, so it's a little different one when you think, but it actually could be very effective and perhaps even more effective than just spilling your narrative and re-traumatizing yourself by talking about it and not really changing anything of how you physically feel and so forth. Okay, so phase 3. So now that we build some resources, we address some of the demons of the past, reshape those memories so they're less triggering, lessen their impact on our life now. Now we're ready to move forward, okay? So I'm starting to think, well, okay, I'm doing better. What are some areas of my life that I wasn't really able to improve the way I wanted to because I was too bogged down by the trauma of my past? So what's on my bucket list of things I want to get better that would make my life more fulfilling, that would enhance the quality of my life? So that's really important question. So we're going to start to identify what are those things that I want to improve, okay? And then we're going to learn ways to increase our enjoyment and satisfaction in our life now. So we might have had problems before, we might have had a really awful past, but it's not too late to make the present better and the future better. And we can learn ways to do that, okay? So it's possible to not forget the past, but not allow it to impact our present life as much as it did before. And I have a greater sense of vitality if I could fully live my life now in the here and now without being overly burdened by what happened to me before. Okay, so here's some more things in phase 3. So body, mind, and emotions, that's what this slide's going to focus on. So these are some building blocks, by the way, all right? So we're going to learn more of these positive things. So before, our bodies were mostly used to protect us, right? So we had these sort of fight, flight, freeze, fold responses that helped us, adapt to a traumatic situation. and to adapt to maybe problematic attachment figures or caregivers in our life. So now we're going to learn, you know what? Our bodies can do more than that. They don't just have to help us survive. They could actually be used to enrich our life and make it even better, right? So first I have to get some of the negative stuff out of the way. So how are my limiting beliefs impacting my body? So when I think some negative things, or, you know, I can't do this, or I'm not good enough, how does that impact my body? So let me just identify that. But now, how do I change my body response to help challenge those negative thoughts and patterns? Okay, so I can learn new movements, new postures, new ways of walking that help me do better now, okay, and change my experience of my building blocks. So next, before, you might have been scared of your emotions. You might have been engaging in target behaviors to make your emotions go away, or to numb them, or to, you know, just feel something because you couldn't feel something. So now we're going to relax a little more about our emotions and learn to appreciate them, and the wisdom that they can help to give us, and the vitality they can give us, and the information about ourselves and others that they can give us. So I'm going to explore connecting with and expressing my emotions in a healthy way, which may have been something I was never able to do before. And part of that is being able to widen my window of tolerance. So expressing emotions in an appropriate manner and experiencing them in a not so dysregulating manner has to do with widening my window of tolerance. So that's the part where my arousal is optimal and I feel comfortable and okay in my life, right? And of course, we want to try to increase our positive emotions. So I want to be allowing myself to feel good things and not just feel guilty of it, or like, you know, I need to squash it because that was an adaptive response in the past. Now, can I make it okay to be happy? Can I make it okay to experience pleasure without feeling guilty or without feeling something negative too? Right? So that's important about doing these things to make my quality of life better now. Okay. And of course, our life quality would never be quite good if our relationships also weren't good, because a lot of times our happiness is tied into who we're connected to and the quality of those when I need to. So those competencies are addressed here in sensorimotor psychotherapy. But of course, relationship skills could be using, you know, DBT has a lot of them. Radically Open DBT has some great relationship skills, plus social signaling, which is awesome too. So I check out a whole lot of things. But, you know, in this particular series, we're going to do all the sensorimotor psychotherapy relationship skills. Okay, so having good relationships is like the icing on the cake. And of course, we need to work on some of our baggage first in phase 2, so we can have the opportunity to have these good relationships without the old stuff interfering. Okay. All right, so we're not going to be overly rigid about the phases though, okay? I want you to be aware of what they are and what they do so that you can decide for yourself which phase should be the one you're emphasizing at this point, okay? So it should suit you and your personal process and needs. And of course, they all are interconnected. So when you learn something in one phase, it helps you in other phases. And sometimes it makes sense to go through them a few different times, like that circle says on the bottom. So after I go through phase 1, 2, and 3, I might say, you know what, I can stand to develop my resources a little more. I'm going to go back and review phase 1. Or you might go to phase 1, do some resource development, do phase 2, realize, you know, this memory stuff is a little harder than I thought, go back and review phase 1, right? Or you might be pretty calm and stable, doing well, and say, you know what, I need to work on some of my relationships because that's pressing for me right now. Let me do a little of phase 3, and then I'll go back to some other phase. So be flexible with it and do what's right for you. But if you find yourself overly triggered, just stop and go back to the resourcing, okay, and work on that more. Like I said in an earlier video, it's not a race, okay? It's not like you get to 1, 2, 3, and then we're graduating, okay? It's a life journey. So we have to go through it in a way that helps us at whatever phase we're in right now in our life. Okay, memories because of the way it was handled. So, you know, just check in on those experiences that you've had in your own therapy, if you've had therapy. Yeah, so just, I'm sorry, I'm kind of talking, but I didn't see the question. So describe your experience of the phases, including successes, struggles, and difficulties. Okay, so there's probably some goods and some bads about each one, maybe some ways you would like to improve it in the future as you're moving forward. So what tasks remain to be addressed or learned in those phases? So if you were to think about, let's say, developing resources. So what resources do you think you have now? And what do you still struggle with? Or what do you still think you need to learn? And then finally, what tasks do you think will be important in your therapy or personal journey in the future? All right, so just do a little journaling about this perhaps, or just some pondering, okay? And this will help you as we move forward into the other skills in sensorimotor psychotherapy. So thanks for joining me today. I hope that learning about the 3 phases gave you a better sense of what you need to work on and what progression you should be going through to help yourself in your own treatment, whether it's on your own or with a therapist. So, so keep reflecting, and thanks for joining me. I'll see you next time. Thanks, everybody.